Registers, genres, and styles. Fundamental varieties of language. Text varieties in your daily life. Before you begin this course, take a minute to think about all the different kinds of text that you encounter over the course of a normal day. In the morning, maybe you have a conversation with a housemate as you have breakfast. You might listen to a radio announcer or read the news online. Then you might send a text message to a friend or family member as you get ready for a class. You might proofread a paper that is due that day or look over the reading you did for homework. When you attend the class, you probably talk with friends, listen to a lecture, and write notes. And that's just the first few hours of your day. For most people, conversation is the most common type of spoken language that they produce. But people typically listen to many different kinds of spoken language. Television shows, commercials, radio or television news reports, classroom lectures, political speech, sermons, and etc. Written language also plays a very important role in daily life for many people. Students produce many different kinds of writing at school. Notes during class session, written assignment, term papers, essays on exam, and probably also text message and or email message. But as with the spoken language, most people read more than they write. In fact, most students read even more different kind of text than they listen to, including social media posts, news reports, blogs, text message, editorial, novels, email message, magazine articles, product reviews, and advertisements, as well as school texts like textbooks, research articles, course syllabi, and other written assignments or handouts. This course investigates that language used in these different kinds of text, both spoken and written. You will see how almost any kind of text has its own characteristic linguistic features. For example, it would not be surprising to end a conversation with the following utterance, but it will be almost inconceivable that this sentence will end a textbook. Rather, language like the following is much more typical. Process of producing and understanding discourse are matters of human feeling and human interaction, and understanding of these processes in language we will contribute to a rational as well as ethical and human basis for understanding what it means to be human. This concluding two sentences from Tannen 2005. How are they two examples different linguistically, and why do those differences exist? These questions are central to the analysis of text varieties, registers, genres, and styles. The focus of the present course, we use the term register, genre, and style to refer to three different perspectives on text variety. The register perspective combines an analysis of linguistic characteristics that are common in a text variety with analysis of the situation of use of the variety. The underlying assumption of the register perspective is that core linguistic features, pronouns, and verbs serve communicative functions. As a result, some linguistic features are common in a register because they are functionally adapted to the communicative purpose in a situational context of text from the register. In contrast, the genre perspective focuses on the conventional structures used to construct a complete text within the variety. For example, the conventional way in which a letter begins and ends. The style perspective is similar to the register perspective in its linguistic focus, analyzing the use of linguistic features that are common in text. but the key difference from the register perspective is that the use of these linguistic features is not functionally motivated. Rather, style features reflect aesthetic preferences associated with particular authors or historical periods. The present course focuses mostly on the register perspective because this perspective is important for the description of all text varieties. That is, any text sample of any type can be analyzed from a register perspective. Because the other two perspectives are more specialized, we provide a less true treatment of their characteristics. However, we include discussion of those perspectives at several places in the course when they are especially useful for understanding the text variety being described. For example, the style perspective is especially useful for comparing fictional prose written by different authors, and the general perspective is especially useful for discussing the structure of academic research articles. We return to a much fuller introduction of the three perspectives in section 1.4. However, we first take up several more basic issues relating to the study of text varieties and their general role in language and society. 1.1.1 Why is it important to analyze text varieties? As a native speaker of a language, you acquired many text varieties without explicitly studying them. For example, nobody explained formal rules for having conversations or how the rules change when you converse with your closest friend rather than your mother, or when you converse via text message rather than spoken language. However, many other varieties are usually learned with explicit instruction. For example, if you are training for a job as a preacher, you will probably explicitly learn about the discourse styles of sermons. Similarly, if you are training for a job as a journalist, you will learn about the written conventions of effective news reporters. One of the most important goals of formal education is to teach text varieties that might not be acquired outside of school. Even before going to school, most different are exposed to written stories and learn how narratives are different from normal conversations. Early in school, children learn to read books of many different types, including fictional stories, historical recounts of past events, and description of natural phenomena. These varieties rely on different linguistic structure and patterns, and students must learn how to recognize and interpret those differences. At the same time, primary school students must learn how to produce some of these different varieties. For example, writing a narrative essay on what they did during summer vacation versus a persuasive essay on whether the school cafeteria should sell candy. The amount of explicit instruction in different text varieties varies across teachers, schools, and countries. But even at a young age, students must somehow learn to control and interpret the language of different varieties, or they will not succeed at school. Textual tasks become more and more demanding as a student progresses through school. A university's education requires the ability to read and understand academic prose, a variety that is extremely different from face-to-face conversation. Further, students must learn how to produce written text from many different specific sub-varieties within academic prose, including persuasive essays in first-year composition, lab reports in science courses, and summary synthesis prose responses on final exams. One of the main goals of a university education is to learn the specialized register of a particular profession whether electrical engineering, chemistry, sociology, finance, or English education. Success requires learning the particular language patterns that are expected for particular situations and communicative purposes. The task of the learning register genre differences is even more challenging for a non-native speaker of a language. For example, thousands of students speak language other than English but choose to attend a university where the primary language of education is English. In the US, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, Singapore, India, and etc. Traditionally, these students were taught general vocabulary and grammatical rules of English in preparation for advanced study. However, in recent years, many applied linguists have come to realize that this is not enough to ensure students' success. Students also need knowledge of register, genre, and differences to succeed in their university education. This awareness has given rise to the field of English for academic purposes, which focuses on teaching the English language skills that are especially helpful for the registers genres used in universities. Similarly, the field of English for specific purposes focuses on description of the language used in registers and genres from a particular profession. Example, nursing or civil engineering, or a particular academic discipline such as biochemistry or physical therapy, or a particular academic discipline such as biochemistry or physical therapy. The ultimate goal of EAP and ESP research is to develop instructional materials that will help students learn the particular language patterns that are typical for the different kinds of text in those fields, but even proficiency with specific written registers genres is not enough for students and professionals. Some non-native speakers are criticized for sounding too much like a book when they speak. Thus, proficiency with spoken registers for conversation and meeting is also important. Register, genre, and style differences are fundamentally important for any student with a primary interest in language. For example, any student majoring in English or in the study of another language like Japanese or Spanish must understand the text varieties in that language. If you are training to become a teacher, for secondary education or for TESOL, you will shortly be faced with the task of teaching your own students how to use the words and structures that are appropriate to different spoken and written tasks, different registers and genres. Other students of language are more interested in the study of literature or the creative writing of new literature. Issues relating to the style perspectives, since the literary effects that distinguish one novel or poem from the next are realized as linguistic differences, while many literary scholars and creative writers become highly proficient without formal training in linguistic analysis. The tools provided in the present course provide an additional perspective for those tasks. Overall, then, text varieties and the difference among them constantly affect people's daily lives. Proficiency with those varieties affects not only success as a student, but also as a practitioner of any profession. From engineering to creative writing to teaching, receptive mastery of different text varieties increases access to information, while productive mastery increases the ability to participate in varying communities And if you cannot analyze a variety that is new to you, you cannot help yourself or others learn to master it. This course provides the foundational knowledge that you will need to effectively analyze, understand, and teach awareness of differences among text varieties. 1.2 Text varieties, registers, and dialects. Variability is inherent in human language. People use different linguistic forms of different occasions, and different speakers of a language will say the same thing in different ways. Most of this linguistic variation is highly systematic. Speakers of a language make choices in pronunciation, morphology, word choice, and grammar depending on a number of non-linguistic factors. These factors include the speaker's purpose in communication, the relationship between speaker and hearer, the production circumstances, and the social characteristic of the speaker. And the highest level, linguistic variation is realized as different language, example, Korean, French, Swahili. At the lowest level, linguistic variation is realized as the differences between one speaker compared to another speaker, or as the differences between two texts produced by the same speaker. In the present course, we use the term text to refer to natural language used for communication, whether it is realized in speech or writing. Thus, a research paper is a text, as is a novel or a news reports. In speech, a sermon and a face-to-face conversation are both text. The notion of text is somewhat fluid as we use it here. First of all, we sometimes distinguish between a complete text and a text except. A complete text is an instance of extended discourse that has a clear start and finish, such as a research article or a sermon. However, many of the texts that we discuss in the course are actually texts of excerpts, segments of discourse extracted from a longer, complete text. Thus, we might discuss a text excerpt of 2 to 3 paragraphs from a novel or several turns of interaction from a conversation. Further, the notion of complete text is in itself somewhat fluid. First, text can be considered at different levels of generality. Thus, a chapter in a book might be considered a complete text, but the entire book might also be considered as a complete text. Similarly, in spoken language, a joke told during a sermon might be considered as a complete text, but the entire sermon can also be treated as a complete text. Beyond that, the boundaries of complete text are not always explicit or clear-cut. This is especially the case in speech. For example, suppose you are having a conversation with your friend Trisha, and then her friend Amy walks up and joins the conversation. A little later, you need to leave, but Trisha and Amy continue to talk. How many conversations have there been, and where are the boundaries of each? For example, did that the conversation between Trisha and Amy begin when Amy arrived or when you left? In the following modules, we use the notion of complete text in cases where it is relatively clear-cut, such as for a complete research article that has a distinct beginning and ending. In other cases, we use the more general term text as a cover term for any extended segment of discourse from speech or writing. Text can be described according to their context, considering the characteristics of people who produce the text and the characteristic of the situations and communicative purposes associated with the text. The general term variety is used for a category of texts that share some social or situational characteristic. For example, a national variety of English refers to the text produced by the speakers of English who reside in a specific country. Example, British English, Australian English, Indian English, and etc. Much of the research in social linguistics has focused on varieties that are associated with different groups of speakers. Example, people who live in different geographic regions, different social economic classes, ethnic groups, women versus men, and etc. These socially defined varieties are referred to as dialects. The present course deals instead with text varieties that occur in particular situation of use, registers, genres, and styles. Our primary focus in the course is the notion of register and the process of register analysis. Introduced in the following section, however, we return to a fuller discussion of dialects versus registers in section 1.3.4.